Okay, sound check. Presenter's laptop, sound check, presenter's laptop, sound check, clerk's laptop, sound check, clerk's laptop. Thank you, everyone. We're going back into pre-meeting mode.
Good morning, everyone. It is February the 5th, 2021, 9:30. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or to make comments. I will now begin the roll call. Please indicate your presence when I call your name. Mayor Fred Eisenberger.
Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Jason Farr.
Good morning and happy birthday.
Thanks, Jay. Councillor Narinder Nan.
Good morning and happy birthday.
Thank you, sister. Councillor Marula.
Good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor, and happy birthday.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins. Councillor Jackson.
Happy birthday. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Jackson.
All of the East Mountain wishes you happy birthday, Deputy Mayor.
That is lovely. I will take it and write it. Councillor Jackson is here. Councillor Pauls.
And the Central Mountain wishes you happy birthday as well.
Oh, thank you, Esther. Thank you. Councillor Danko.
Present and happy birthday, Chad.
Councillor Clark.
I am present and happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Councillor Maria Pearson.
Good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor, present, and again, many happy returns, happy birthday from all of Ward 10 Stony Creek.
Thank you, ma'am. Really appreciate that. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I'm present and I hope your husband buys you a big gift and maybe you can report back to us on that.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I do have to declare gifts, so Councillor Vanderbeek.
Good morning and happy birthday, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Arlene. Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Partridge. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda this morning?
Yes, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, there's one change to today's agenda. It's added item 7.1, the impact of the 2021 fare increase, 10-year local transit strategy, PW 21008, and happy birthday from me as well.
Thanks, Steph. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Councillor Pearson. May I have an e-vote, please? Vote is up. Councillor Pauls, Councillor Jackson, are you able to vote? Thank you. And I have a thumbs up from Councillor Collins and Councillor Clark. Thank you. The vote is closed. Vote carries. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Committee, are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, thank you, Clerk. Approval of the minutes, January 28th, 2021. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve these minutes, please? Mayor Eisenberger, Councillor Jackson. Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none. And thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Marula, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Pauls. The vote is closed.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. It just reads in it's loading. Please wait while the content loads. But it seems to be stuck in that mode. And through you to whoever could potentially answer this, should I be pressing F5 accordingly?
Yes, please, Councillor, I would give that a shot. Otherwise, we might have to go with your thumbs up, thumbs down today.
Okay, let's
At
go with the
5:30.
thumbs up for now, and I'll
Okay.
work on this. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. That's okay.
Thank you, Councilor Marula. Okay, we're already lickety-splickety on to item 6, which are the presentations for this morning. Thank you. First up in 6.1 is the City Manager's Office giving an overview of her 2021 operating budget. Before we do that, Mr. Zagieric has asked to speak to us and add a few words, so I'm going to turn the floor over to him.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Deputy Mayor, and happy birthday.
Thank you, sir.
Not sure that Mother Nature is cooperating with you today, but nonetheless, happy birthday. I just want to take a minute just to inform Council as to what the intent for today's presentations are, and to lay out a bit of a roadmap for the balance of our budget deliberations. You'll note that today's the final day of departmental presentations. After the City Manager's Office, I'll be presenting the corporate financials and non-program revenues. Just note in that presentation, it does include, for your reference, slides with as it relates to referred items and business cases. The intent for today is not to deliberate on those, but those will come back before you on February 11th. The agenda also includes the motion and staff report related to freezing transit fares. And following today's presentations, we'll begin Council's deliberations. As a reminder, February 8th is a budget GIC meeting scheduled to hear our public delegations on the agenda. And I believe to date we have about 20 delegations who are currently scheduled to present. There's
Mike,
also.
I think we're closer to 50. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
It's just not up on
Thanks
the
for
web
the
yet.
update, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
And there are JAC budget deliberations scheduled for February 11th, February 22nd, February 25th, March 1st, and March 3rd. And I'll go through the intent for those scheduled dates. February 11th, the plans to begin deliberations on the council referred items and business case items. We'll also provide an update on where we stand in terms of the residential tax impact and provide a list of any approved or pending amendments. We also anticipate reporting back on the enhanced enforcement in waterfall areas and the neighbor-to-neighbor food center motions. February 22nd, we will have a information report summarizing the 2020 assessment growth position. We expect that any additions related to the volunteer advisory committees that were referred to the GIC budget from standing committees will be considered on February 22nd. And we hope to have an update on the use of Safe Restart funds in 2020 and a forecast for 2021. Also at this meeting, it may be appropriate to introduce the budget recommendation report, but that'll be subject to where we stand as it relates to deliberations. February 25th, a report on the mechanics related to a possible establishment of a tax on vacant residential properties is scheduled to come before committee, and we'll continue any deliberations on any outstanding items or new items raised from the prior meetings. And as well, March 1st and 3rd are scheduled dates, and subject to where we stand on deliberations on March 1st and 3rd, and subject to any reports that are requested in the earlier dates. We'll bring any additional information that committee requests to those dates. We will pause during our traditional March break period. Not quite sure what March break will look like this year, but nonetheless, we typically pause. And just as a reminder, we are scheduled to have council approve the budget on March 31st. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, thanks for the opportunity. I just wanted to remind committee members where we stand as it relates to the budget process and provide a bit of a roadmap for the balance of the month. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zagieric. So in summary, no rest for the wicked. I think we have a question from Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Ferguson, please, to Mr. Zagieric.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, I know the province is considering canceling March break this year. and travel is prohibited. I know we always use that opportunity to get a break, and some of us go down to the sunny south, and especially staff, because they have to do all these budget presentations. Is that something we should consider this year, since nobody's traveling and it looks like the kids are going to be in school through March break, and get the budget done a little earlier?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Frankly, we're in the hands of committee. If committee and council wish to, subject to where we sit in terms of deliberations early March, if there's a interest in scheduling some additional dates and accelerating the approval of the budget, we're in committee's hands, subject to procedural bylaw and the booking of dates and the advertising of those dates, as well as staff will need some time to turn around all of the information to ultimately have before you to approve the budget. So short answer is subject to where we stand, Councillor, at the beginning of March. If that's an option, happy to work with clerks and staff in general, and investigate if there's an opportunity to approve the budget earlier than the end of March.
Okay, so my main question to you, Mike, is can staff be ready? It sounds like they may not, and so we probably should pass on that idea if staff can't be ready, and fully understand that, because they were following the original schedule that was put together. I just thought I'd throw up a trial balloon. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions of Mr. Zagaric on the schedule of the budget? Councillor Farr, did I see your hand up? No? Okay, my apologies. Okay, then. Thank you very much, Mike, for that schedule and that update, and for the public as well, so that they could keep track. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce, of course, Jeanette Smith, the City Manager for the City of Hamilton, who will be presenting her office budget, and I will there she is. Hand over the floor now. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and all members of council, and happy birthday, Councillor, as well. If you'll give me a moment, I'm going to just share my screen. And I'm assuming you can all see it okay now. Is it clear?
Yes,
Perfect.
thank you.
Good morning, members of council. It's my pleasure to present you the proposed 2021 budget for the City Manager's Office. I'll also be providing an overview of 2020 achievements and look ahead to key initiatives for 2021. With me today, and you'll see them on the screen later, are the senior leaders in the City Manager's Office: Laura Fontana from Human Resources, Matthew Grant from Communications, Charles Brown from Audit, and Cyrus Tirani, our Chief Digital Officer. I want to acknowledge Cyrus this year, who has temporarily taken on additional responsibilities since John Hertel, the Director of Strategic Partnerships, retired in May of last year. Before I start, I would like to thank Monique Garwood, Karen Leslie, and Amanda Thind from Finance, Isis Chicas from Communications, and Lisa Zinkowicz, Program Manager for Corporate Initiatives, who worked with the leadership team to prepare the budget and presentations today. So thank you to all of them. In my budget presentation last January, I committed to undertaking a review of the City Manager's Office functions and structure to ensure we could effectively meet the priorities of Council and support the senior leadership team to advance the term of Council priorities, while ensuring the effective and efficient operations of the City overall. This slide summarizes the main functions of the City Manager's Office. As mentioned in my City Manager review last November, there are areas where we can strengthen our capacity and make maximum use of existing resources available. They include advancing the city's data capabilities and information systems to support decision-making, organizational performance management, and driving a culture of continuous improvement and innovation. Also, ensuring the needs of Hamilton and Hamiltonians are consistently considered at Queen's Park and on Parliament Hill, and ensuring that our corporation continues to support groups and initiatives that champion equity, diversity, and inclusion, particularly those that have been most impacted by COVID-19. As you heard last week in the department presentations, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a significant issue for the entire corporation over the past year. In addition to the sustained emergency response, city services had to continue to adapt as provincial orders changed and new public health measures were needed to keep our employees and residents safe. I want to take a moment to say I am very proud of how our staff at all levels of the organization worked together to respond to this pandemic and ensure services continued. To support the emergency response, human resources staff from the city manager's office were responsible for overseeing logistics for the Emergency Operations Center. With the support of others from across the corporation, this involved the establishment and operation of a centralized supply depot store for distribution of personal protective equipment and essential supplies to support all city operations. To help ensure continued supply and efficient distribution, process audits were undertaken by our audit staff. Human Resources also directed all staff redeployment from across the corporation, including 9 from the city manager's office, and acquired and distributed all necessary technology to facilitate remote working and telecommuting in record time. Through a variety of channels, communication staff ensured our community had access to timely and accurate information about the impacts of provincial orders and necessary public health measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19. With in-person events canceled, City Manager's Office staff supported the shift to online public engagement with the launch of Engage Hamilton. Staff also responded to the impacts of the pandemic on our community groups through making adjustments to the City Enrichment Fund. Human Resources staff led city efforts to ensure our employees were kept safe while maintaining services. To accommodate COVID-19 related health and safety protocols and working from home, new policies, procedures, and guidelines were created, rolled out, and updated as required. The digital office was key in the development of our COVID-19 online health screening tool for any employee entering their workplace, and Human Resources staff tracked over 11,000 City of Hamilton employee COVID-19 tests. In January of last year, Council confirmed the collective priorities for the remainder of the term. In many cases, the pandemic has shown us that these priorities are more important than ever, and has confirmed that the complex issues embedded within them will require support from other levels of government and partnerships with many stakeholders. The City Manager's Office will continue to ensure our collective staff resources are focused around these priorities, and we provide communications, public engagement, intergovernmental relations, and human resources support as required. We are also committed to monitoring and reporting on progress annually through the Strategic Plan Term of Council Priority Report Card and communicating more regularly around the progress that is being made. Staff in our office directly contributed to several Term of Council priorities. In support of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we completed initial consultation with more than 200 residents and equity-seeking groups in support of mitigating and preventing hate in our city. Staff initiated a review of policy options to counter public display of symbols considered racist and discriminatory, and established a 9-member community advisory panel to assist with the recruitment of the slate of board members for the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center. Staff are also working with anchor institutions within the city and joined a GTHA municipal network to look at how to collectively address systemic racism. Looking internally, as outlined at the General Issues Committee in December, we undertook an employment equity survey in 2020. This was an important first step to understand and ensure that our workforce is representative of the community we serve, and what barriers we need to address in our recruitment and advancement within the organization. In support of continued improvements, a standardized interview guide was created with training completed for all hiring managers. And I will mention that I just was informed this morning that the number of staff responding is actually over 3,700, so almost 50% of our workforce. Over the next few slides, I'll speak to initiatives within the City Manager's Office that support the trust and confidence in city government priority. As mentioned earlier, being able to quickly shift to support online public engagement to ensure initiatives that required input for the public was able to continue. Since the launch of Engage Hamilton in June 2020, 24 initiatives have used this public engagement platform. In continuing to look for opportunities to provide the public with greater access to city government information, we increased the available number of open data sets by 14%. The continued addition of data sets and interactive data tools is important, as evidenced by the interest from the public, with data set views increasing by 542% and more than 1 million views of the COVID-19 interactive map. We also continue to focus on ensuring accountability across the organization. Audit Services completed 10 audits, developed the framework for reporting serious matters for Council, and brought forward the first Fraud and Waste Hotline report to the Audit, Finance and Administration Committee back in October. Moving on to the healthy, respectful, and supportive workplace term of Council priority. Decisions made early in the pandemic due to uncertainty and projected deficits had significant impacts on how our human resources staff supported our employees. These decisions included a freeze of non-essential hiring, restricting in-person training, and shifting as many people as possible from working in the office to working from home. In 2020, Labor Relations negotiated 2 collective agreements and successfully settled 92% of mediations. An ongoing focus for leadership across the corporation, supported by our staff in human resources and communications, was ensuring our employees had the information and resources they required to maintain their physical and mental health and resiliency throughout this pandemic. Employees received information through virtual town halls, regular emails, and dedicated pages on the city's eNet. Staff also needed just-in-time supports as they dealt with the impacts of COVID-19 in their personal lives as well. In 2020, the city provided resource LifeSpeak on demand was accessed 9,507 times, an increase over 236% over 2019. This web-based program provides expert-led online streaming dealing with a wide variety of health, family, elder care, personal growth and development, and work-life balance topics. In 2020, the most resource material focused on mental health, an increase of 978% over 2019. Stress management and resilience was the third most accessed topic, with demand increasing by 244%. Staff are regularly reminded about the Employee and Family Assistance Program, and leaders made extra efforts to connect with staff working remotely to ensure their well-being. Before I wrap up on 2020, I want to touch on a few other highlights. Strategic partnerships and revenue generation partnered with the private sector, resulting in $800,000 in cash revenues and $1.3 million in-kind contributions. The City of Hamilton was named one of the top 7 intelligent communities in the world by the Intelligent Community Forum for the 2nd time. City Lab moved to online challenge for submissions, resulting in projects such as connecting families with loved ones in long-term care homes and visitor management for Hamilton's waterfall. The City Enrichment Fund supported 253 unique organizations and artists. Enhancing the accessibility and use of data across the organization is one of my priorities. In 2020, Human Resources introduced a dashboard focused on absenteeism, attendance, attrition, and employee demographics to support departments in making data-driven decisions about their workforce. And now I'll move on to the proposed 2021 operating budget. As seen on this slide, the overall complement in the City Manager's office has been reduced by 2 FTE in communications following the 2020 budget approval. This slide provides a summary of the City Manager's office overall proposed budget and by individual division. Overall, the office is requesting a total increase of $489,130, or 4% from 2020. Nearly 86% of total expenses are employee-related costs, which represents 2.5% of the overall increase. The proposed budget focuses on utilizing the existing complement in the most effective way possible. On the next slide, I'll speak to the drivers of the percentage of change for the proposed 2021 budget. The main driver of the increase is employee-related wage and benefit increases, totaling $310,000 or 2.5%. Additional budget drivers for the office include a net increase in recoveries from rising costs in facilities and new computer costs, a reduction in recovery from benefits and WSIB reserves, and a reduction in the revenue target of $76,000. Staff were too optimistic in their estimation of revenue last year, and when reviewing past trends, we've corrected it in this budget. The multi-year budget impact as a result of the assumptions for salary and benefits, facility costs, and other operational costs such as technology are shown here, ranging from 2.2 to 2.3%. Similar to what you have heard through each of the other department presentations, the major driver is employee-related costs. Looking ahead in this coming year and beyond, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, the City Manager's office will focus on the functions on this slide. In addition to the day-to-day work, there are a number of key initiatives that I'd like to highlight for the coming year. In the weeks and months ahead, until a vaccine for COVID-19 is readily available, public health remains our priority, along with supporting our staff in this prolonged emergency. We will continue with the efforts highlighted earlier in the presentation and prepare to support post-COVID-19 recovery efforts, including the transitioning of employees back into the workplace. Staff will continue to be involved in supporting all the term of council priorities through communications, public engagement, intergovernmental relations, and human resources. 2021 key initiatives for the City Manager's office staff include finalizing for council approval the recommendations from the engagement and research on preventing and mitigating hate and racism, and operationalizing the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center Board. Building on work done in response to COVID-19, staff will review existing online services and identify opportunities for enhancements or new online service options. We will continue to expand the accessibility of data to the public and our own staff, and continue advocacy to improve broadband access. In support of improved communications and engagement, the website redesign will be completed, and a public engagement policy will be developed for council approval to provide guidance to staff on integrating the use of our virtual engagement tool, Engage Hamilton, with traditional in-person public engagement when the emergency ends. Community enrichment staff will continue to improve their processes and are assessing EDI opportunities within the fund. And lastly, staff will develop an intergovernmental relations strategy to support council and senior staff. Human Resources will finalize and action the equity, diversity, and inclusion framework for the organization, undertake a redesign of the non-union benefit plan for council's consideration, and continue to support the resiliency of our staff as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. We will also undertake the second iteration of the Our People employee survey, which council approved delaying by 1 year due to the circumstances in 2020, providing a chance to survey employees on the effectiveness of engagement measures during COVID-19 and develop appropriate action plans to build on the positive results of the action planning that took place in the response to the survey in 2017. Background research will be undertaken for the Code Red audit, and phase 1 of the equity, diversity, and inclusion audit will be initiated. The road operations, The road operations and construction program, cybersecurity, and Greitmeyer Arena audits will also be tabled with council. Looking to 2022 and beyond, some of the initiatives started in 2021 will be completed. In addition, staff will continue to improve reporting on progress of the term of council priorities, especially our equity, diversity, and inclusion work. We'll review the City Lab program as the existing partnership agreements expire and make recommendations to council. Staff will upgrade and expand the city's digital infrastructure in support of the Smart City initiatives, and staff will create and implement a new corporate communication strategy. Whoop, I have to, there we go, sorry about that. Other initiatives are projected in those outlook years are implementing the internal equity, diversity, inclusion framework into city program development and service delivery models, rollout of the new non-union benefit plan if approved by council, and report the results of our 2021 Our People survey, developing and implementing action plans. Our audit staff will also evaluate the fraud and waste hotline pilot, making recommendations to council on next steps. Thank you very much, and the leadership team and I would be happy to answer questions. I will just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, City Manager Smith, for that very detailed and rich overview. It's greatly appreciated. I'm going to go to members of council to see if they have questions of your presentation. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, City Manager, for your presentation. Very thorough. And just going to page, I just want to focus a couple of quick questions, Deputy Mayor, on pages 17 and 18 of your PowerPoint, City Manager Smith. You've got one extra director up there without a name. Can I just ask who that might be? I always like knowing with upper management, names and faces if I could. I see a great team you've got there with Laura, Charles, Cyrus, and Matthew. I just wondered who that extra director was, please.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. That's the vacancy created by John Hertel's retirement, and I'm going to be proceeding to recruit that this year. Cyrus has just been overseeing that portfolio temporarily.
Perfect, and that might then slide into page 18 then. With your 4%, most of it is on the 3% budget line item, City Manager Smith, Communications and Government Relations. In my humble opinion, your communications department under the new director grant has, in my humble opinion, never been better for our city in a long time. Government relations, is there anything more, Deputy Mayor Wilson, the city manager can share with us on getting that position, that salient critical position for a municipality of our size filled. I know it was one of your objectives when you first arrived, and you and I had some private chit chats as well when we got to know each other face to face. And here we are about a year later. So maybe the status of that, and obviously that's a main driver, but an important driver, and I'm still supportive, but how about for public consumption, where that sits? Through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, please.
City Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and to Councillor Jackson and the members of council. So that is my priority. So last year it was getting the review done and getting the communications unit up and running. And so this year with the new director, that will be the first priority, is to have that whole government relations strategy, especially for our term of council priorities. And I'll bring interim update to council this year.
Perfect. That's what I was going to ask at the very end. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I'm satisfied with the city manager's response. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. No further questions. If I could hand over the chair to Councillor Clark, the former deputy mayor, so I could ask a single question, I think, to our city manager.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Please proceed.
City Manager Smith, I don't want to delve too much into the weeds with this, but I would like to give you an opportunity to speak to the reference on one of the slides to incorporating EDI into service delivery models and programming. Could you just unpack that a little bit so I'm sure I understand it, the intent? Thank you.
Yep.
City Manager Smith.
Yes, through the chair, I'll start, and then I'll invite Laura Fontana, who's accountable for this piece of work, to add to it if she'd like. So as you know, equity, diversity, inclusion is a term of council priority. There's some outward facing work we're doing and then the inward facing work. The first phase was doing our internal equity survey of our own employees. So we had data. There is a team of staff, a steering committee that are coming up with a framework for the city with common definitions, equity, diversity, inclusion, making sure staff fully understand. And then we'll have to start reviewing our existing programs to see and ensure we're incorporating those lenses into the decision making and policy making in the various programs. There are some programs already where that's happening. I can think of the housing and homelessness program where there's been a lot of work done, but we still have other programs and areas that we need to look at that. And Laura, I don't know if you would like to add anything.
Ms. Fontana.
Thank you, through the Deputy Mayor. The EDI work, this is one of the latter stages of the work in terms of, creating the inclusive programs and services that meets the needs of our diverse community. So this is where the EDI framework becomes embedded in the various programs and contract terms and conditions as required. This work will be done in consultation with the operating departments, where the subject matter expertise resides. So once the EDI steering committee has developed the corporate framework, it'll be shared with SLT and we'll be incorporating it into the departmental decision making. That's when the general managers will be incorporating it into their PADS programs and cascading it throughout the organization. But ultimately, the framework needs to be embedded into our various programs and services and contracts, for example, so that we have that overriding lens on what we're doing internally and externally in terms of meeting our EDI requirements. So essentially, it's when we roll it out to the organization and making sure that there's a check and balance in terms of how we're performing our EDI strategy.
Councillor Wilson.
Supplementary then to that, will the EDI framework, when you're rolling it out, include our Board of Health and our Public Health Unit?
Ms. Fontana.
Thank you. Through the Deputy Mayor, well, it will include the Board of Health, our Public Health Department, our city employees. So indeed, it would include all city employees.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much for that. Members of council and the public, the reason I'm asking these questions with respect to EDI and their application to the corporation and public health in particular is, again, we know the data has shown us, and it's not unique to Hamilton, but there is this pandemic has not been felt equally in our community. It's particularly affecting seniors, people of lower income, and racialized members of our community. Data is really important because it enables us to inform ways and means for the so what, and so that we can create our programs to address those inequities at their root, and that includes the collection of data. So thank you very much for that piece of information to both Laura and to City Manager Smith. I'm finished with my questions, so I'd like to take the chair back.
You have the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw Mayor Eisenberger, and then Councillor Clark thereafter.
EDI being such a very important part of the work we do. And I was delighted in the previous term to ask Evelyn Myrie to create a handbook on EDI and how do we move forward on that, and have been able to bring that forward to this term, as well as to the Hamilton Police Services. And so my question to you, City Manager, is that handbook still, a bit of a foundation in terms of how we move forward? Certainly a lot of great information was brought into that document that was funded through my office. And I think it certainly has a lot of merit in terms of how we continue to advance the very important EDI work. So are you still using that document as a bit of a foundation to kind of get to the next steps? Because I think it did offer some comparisons on what happens in other communities and how we can advance this more quickly in our community.
Yes, so I can tell you that the steering committee that HR is overseeing, that's one of the inputs they have, and looking at it as they're doing their work. And in terms of, there's lots of learnings with our other anchor institutions, the hospitals, the Board of Education, the Hamilton Community Foundation. We as leaders are also talking about this issue and looking at our common issues and sharing, etc.
That's great. Thank you. I know I do want to, acknowledge once again Evelyn Myrie, who did some great work for our office that then was able to be delivered to the city as a kind of a foundational document that we can move forward on. So very much appreciated. That was great input, and certainly I think gives us a good start. I think we need to continue to advance this quicker. Faster if we can, but thoroughly, so that it stands the test of time as we work through these issues. And when the pandemic has definitely highlighted inadequacies in terms of how people are getting resources in our community, and certainly EDI will certainly be helpful in terms of how we apply that. So thank you for all that great work, and I look forward to an upcoming report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Clark, please.
My questions were asked and answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have no further speakers on the docket. Again, my thanks to City Manager Smith for your insight this morning and your time. Appreciate it very much. Oh, misspoke. Councillor Nan.
I apologize. I've been trying to use the eScribe, and I think my program is just lagging a little bit. So sorry for the waving of
Not
hand. Through you to City Manager Smith, I'm really happy and pleased to hear about the public engagement policy coming forward. I think that we've heard quite a bit as councillors' offices throughout 2020 and through this pandemic how important it is for residents to be able to get the information about how to get engaged, and understanding the limitations of a web-only platform for that engagement, specifically for seniors. And we also discussed this yesterday at the Emergency Community Services Committee meeting in terms of how to, I believe it was Councillor Clark's words, how to use some old school tactics in order to reach some residents who don't have access to internet or don't even use email, for example. And so will this policy help lay out from an equity perspective the fact that we do have this digital inequity and who has access, and how our policy will be addressing that moving forward, please?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, absolutely. you know, staff kind of stopped all the in-person and moved all to virtual. That has some benefits to access for some, but it also puts barriers up for others. And then all of a sudden, when things open up again, there's going to be a lot of, you know, potential confusion. Do I use this tool? Do I do that tool? What's best practice say around? And so we want to use this time before everything opens up to look at all those issues, put that policy forward. It will address the issues about access in its various forms and bring that forward to council for approval. So staff have a clear framework, understanding council's direction about how we do engagement going forward.
Excellent. I'm really happy to hear that framework and consistency is going to be key for us to continue to evolve moving forward. So really glad to see that's on the docket for 2021's work plan. Thank you. That was my only question. The EDI ones were covered. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
There we go. Thank you for Councillor Nan. She reminded me of our conversations. So if I may, just to the city manager, one of the issues that I had been raising and a few of my other colleagues have been raising is we have rural residents. 75% of my ward has no internet unless you have a satellite dish internet, which is very expensive. I have a lot of living or working poor in my ward and a fair bit of poverty, not as much as other wards, but it's right across the city. At $100 a month for internet service, they can't afford it. I've spoken with residents who are working poor and they do not buy subscriptions to newspapers because they can't afford it. They're using that money to feed their families. And so when we look at the areas where there's some geographical distancing and there's no internet, and when you look at people who, as Councillor Nan rightly talked to, who are marginalized residents, and because of this digital inequity, I think is the terminology that the council used, we have to do things differently. Putting ads in newspapers are not reaching people. Doing the internet, it's not reaching people. I think it's great, and I've complimented Councillor Thorne, Mr. Thorne, for the billboard ads about the MCR and all of that in terms of the Alpharetta growth and that. It's excellent, but it's directing them to a website where residents who may want to comment can't. And so I had suggested that we look at as an option surveys that could be dropped, you know, to not address mail, but dropped to occupant in certain areas. So the rural areas and areas where we know there's affordable housing, we can use the technology to identify certain key areas of the city that need to get that information and give them the opportunity for civic engagement. So I'm offering it as a suggestion, Madam City Manager. When you're looking at Engage Hamilton, there might be a way that we can improve it so that we can bridge over, if that's the term, that digital divide that has developed not through anything that the city has done, but just over time.
It's reality.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, through the chair, if I can comment on that, I think it's a good point. One size will not fit all. So, you know, we can't say we're going to do a consultation, use Engage Hamilton, or we're going to use a consultation and do all in person. We're going to have to look at the geography of our city, the makeup of our city, and come up with a policy framework on how we're going to truly ensure no one's left behind and everyone has that opportunity to be engaged and have their voice heard. And that's why this year we have to do that research from all those different angles and bring back a policy that you can look at and see if we missed anything that you're comfortable with. And then we'll roll out to all staff for on a go forward basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have one more speaker, Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to the City Manager, a couple of my questions have already been answered, but I do want to pick up on what Councillor Clark has just brought up, because that was something of great concern to me, and it is to not only my constituents, but because I sit on Ag and Rural Affairs and I attend the Hamilton Wentworth Federation of Agriculture meetings, I know that it isn't only problematic about rural internet, it's problematic about postal codes. And so it is a serious problem if an item pertains to a particular ward in the rural area. So I cannot mail to my ward. I suspect that, well, and I know that with Councillor Partridge and Councillor Ferguson, that is also true because those postal codes, not only do they cross in my ward, other wards, they cross into other municipalities. And so when I try to mail to my ward, I'm mailing to part of Puslinch and part of Cambridge. And so whether that's coming out of my office budget because it's something that I want to put out, or whether for engagement or information purposes, or whether it is something that staff are trying to reach my constituents about, it's impossible unless you are going to walk every mailbox. And so I wanted to put that on the table so that you're aware that we aren't just challenged with reaching people via internet, and in the rural areas, we're not even talking necessarily about a problem that they can't have internet because it's too expensive or whatnot. The topography is such at the moment that the mechanism for getting internet out there just isn't there for them. So it's not that they can't afford it. Maybe, so I'm sure that's true of some of them. I'm not minimizing that, but the infrastructure just isn't there to give it to them. And so I wanted to make sure that that another challenge to the rural area and seeking information from them or getting information to them is recognized as we go forward here. And so I realize that doesn't really require an answer from you. So I just want to move along and say how much I appreciated your presentation today, and thank you for all the work that you and your team have done over the last year and will continue to do as long as possible, as long as necessary. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting conversations, and I think reflecting the fact that we are not just an administrative unit as we were created. We are a democratic unit, which we have to adhere to and be cognizant of principles of equity and who we listen to, how we get to listen. So the importance of being a smart, well-staffed organization, very important. Thank you, City Manager Smith.
Thank you.
We are now going to go to Mr. Zagarek, item 6.2, corporate financials, non-program revenues, council referred items, and business cases. Mr. Zagarek.
Thank you.
Stephanie's, sorry, Mr. Zagarek, if I could just
okay.
stop you for 1 second. I need a mover to receive
Thank you.
City Manager Smith's presentation, moved by Councillor Clark and seconded by Councillor Pearson. If you could vote, thank you. The vote is up. Mayor Eisenberger? Councillor Ferguson? The vote is closed. That carries 11 to 0. Thank you very much, Mr. Zagarek. Apologies, that was my faux pas in the chair.
Yep, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I hope my sharing the screen didn't make it harder to count the vote. As I mentioned earlier this morning, the intent for this presentation is to go over the corporate financials and non-program revenues. There is some historical information that's part of the slide deck, as well as the business cases and council referred. And again, those are provided today just for your reference. And in the case of the business cases and council referred, those will be brought forward on February 11th for some further deliberations and discussion, and the appropriate staff will be in attendance to speak to those items as well. So just as a reminder to committee members and to the public, for the benefit of the public, corporate financials are typically expenditures that don't necessarily align to a specific program or department, and for that reason they are reported and tracked within the series of categories that comprise corporate financials. And non-program revenues similarly are revenues that do not necessarily align to a particular program or department, and for that reason they are as well tracked and reported separately through what we refer to as non-program revenues. So I just wanted to provide that context for the benefit of committee and members of the public. You'll see that corporate financials is comprised of two categories: corporate initiatives and corporate pensions, benefits, and contingency. And we'll break that down a little further in the next slide, and I'll speak to each of these subcategories. So focusing from the top, corporate initiatives, you'll see that the first subcategory is area rated levy, and these relate to payments tied to the acquisition of various parcels of land across the city of Hamilton. And as it relates to these council approved acquisitions, the cost of financing that land acquisition is borne by former municipalities. And hence it's referenced as area rated levy. You'll see that we're not anticipating any further acquisitions based on deliberations to date for 2021. If that were to change over the balance of 2021, we would capture that through in-year reporting. So at this time, we're not aware or tracking of any additional acquisitions for 2021, and you can see for that reason there is not a change in the area rated levy for 2021. Operating impacts of capital. These are tied to capital projects that are either approved in 2021 or previous years that have that require either staffing or have some associated operating impacts. As an example, if it was an expansion to a recreation center that increased the programming, there would be some additional staffing, as well as the cost to operate and maintain that expansion, including utilities and general maintenance. So just as an example of operating impacts from capital, and you can see that based on 2021 approved projects and projects that were approved in prior years, we're reflecting a operating impact of about $3.4 million. The cost recovery adjustment, I'll take a minute to speak to this. This is tied to, in 2019, transportation planning was restructured and transferred from Public Works over to Planning and Economic Development. And while the expenditure and the FDE were transferred in 2019, what we discovered in 2020 was that the offsetting revenues weren't similarly transferred and restated. So in 2020, in an effort to avoid any charges to those recoveries in Public Works, given that the function was transferred over to Planning and Economic Development, we restated the recoveries. These recoveries, the revenues were through the capital program in 2020, and we effectively protected them in corporate financials to ensure that there were no charges against those recoveries. In 2021, through further review of the activities, we determined that recovering those costs from capital was not appropriate. And for that reason, you see that the $1.3 million represents a levy impact. So again, it was triggered by an error made in 2019 where the expenditures were transferred, the revenues, offsetting revenues were not. And in preparation of 2021, we determined that recovering these costs from capital was not appropriate. And for that reason, they are reflected as a levy pressure. As well as there is a series of other costs that make up the other category. And these other costs include costs associated with the physician recruitment program, our AMO support fund, our audit fees, some transfers to our tax stabilization program, as well as the waterfront Pier 8 rink. So those are some of the other categories of costs, and we've just grouped them and lumped them together, and you can see that is changing by 3.7% or $60,000. Two-thirds of that $60,000 change is tied to an inflationary adjustment for our contract surrounding the operation of the Harborfront rink. And so again, that subtotal for corporate initiatives represents a increase, and those are principally tied to the operating impacts of capital, and for that adjustment to a 2019 and 20 error. And you'll see that that represents, while it's a significant percentage, it's principally made up of those two categories. Working further to corporate pensions, benefits, and contingencies, you'll see a significant decline in our contingency adjustments as collective agreements are being negotiated. If there is a risk of an outcome that varies from the guideline, we set aside a contingency in corporate financials for that potential risk. As the vast majority of our collective agreements have been settled, you can see that we're just carrying a small contingency with a small number tied to a small number of collective agreements. And again, I think we have somewhere in the area of 16 collective agreements. And so the decrease is tied to the fact that the majority of collective agreements have been settled, and consequently, we're not required to carry a contingency as there is minimal risk tied to the remaining agreements. Employee benefits, sick and vacation, and actually there's a third component to that. This is tied to sick, vacation, and our WSIB obligations, and you can see that employee benefits, sick, vacation, and WSIB is increasing by about 17.5% or 280,000. Surrounding vacation liability, we really have three categories of staff or groupings of staff that vary as it relates to their vacation entitlements. So employees that were hired prior to 1980, these employees had to work a full year from their hire date, accruing their vacation before they were able to take some time off. So consequently, when those employees leave the city of Hamilton, they are entitled to a payout equivalent to a full year of vacation. So that's the one category. We have certain groups that, again, were hired in 1980 or later, and these employees were not able to take vacation until January 1st of the next calendar year when they were hired. So consequently, those employees could be entitled for up to a full year of vacation payout when they as well leave the employment of the city. And finally, there are employees that are entitled to vacation based on a prorated basis based on their time employed at the city of Hamilton. And so as you can see, as it relates to that category, that represents one of our liabilities. The other liability is principally made up of two groups. The sick bank liability is tied to our fire union entitlement, as well as some employees that were hired previous years who were entitled to sick bank, but who are no longer eligible to accumulate sick bank. And this is a small number of employees. And again, as it relates to our sick bank liability, that too is a factor as it relates to the change in 2021, and I believe that represents an increase of about $590,000. The earlier liability, our vacation pay, is actually declining year over year by about $280,000. And the final liability that I'll bring committee's attention to in that category is WSIB. The City of Hamilton, as other employers, have an obligation around WSIB, and we are required to provide workplace injury insurance coverage to all employees through the Provincial WSIB board. In addition to those claims, the city pays the board an administrative fee of 22.2%. And so for 2021, there is an increase of about $500,000 to our contribution to WSIB, and that's reflected through some recoveries through the departments. So those are the three subcategories that make up employee benefits. Retiree benefits, these are health and dental benefits that are that employees who have retired and left the city but have not reached the age of 65 continue to be eligible for. And it also includes non-OMERS staff pensions. These are our legacy pension plans, our HSR legacy pension plan, and our old regional pension plan. So as it relates to our retiree benefits, you can see it is increasing by about 2.8%, or approximately $364,000. And again, it's principally tied to the number of retirees we have who have not reached the age of 65, who continue to be eligible for health and dental, and as I mentioned previously, the two legacy pension plans. So again, that makes up the category under retiree benefits. And you'll see the subtotal of corporate pensions, benefits, and contingencies. There is a benefit of approximately $400,000, and that's principally tied to the fact that a majority of the collective agreements have been settled and we're not required to carry a contingency surrounding the risk of those agreements. So again, you'll see that as it relates to corporate financials, the increase is approximately $4.3 million, or about 23%. Moving on to non-program revenues, the city receives what are referred to as payment in lieu of taxes, and these are principally tied to provincial and federal facilities, government facilities that do not pay taxes based on market rates, but rather pay what is referred to as a payment in lieu of taxes, or PILT. And you can see that the payment in lieu of taxes is actually increasing by approximately $373,000, and that is principally driven by an increase in either space that these facilities are occupying in the city. It could be an increase in beds, or as it relates to post-secondary or hospital, or increase in other government space, provincial, federal government space. So again, that's a positive, a increase in contribution. I just want to note that a number of the recovery rates have not changed in this category. I think we've spoken over the last few weeks, principally around hospitals and post-secondary, what's referred to heads and beds. So while payment in lieu is increasing, that rate, for instance, has not changed since 1987 and continues to be $75 based on head or bed. Penalty and interest is revenue that the city receives as it relates to property owners who fall behind, as it relates to their property taxes. You'll see that we're not projecting a change in penalty and interest, while council deferred penalty and interest for a portion of 2020 because of the pandemic and in support of taxpayers. What we've noticed is that the vast majority of taxpayers to date have met their obligations as it relates to property taxes. The one class of taxpayers that are slightly lower to date relative to historical averages is the commercial class. And And again, so staff at this time are not suggesting amending the penalty and interest, and that continues to represent about $11 million. Right away, these are revenues that the city receives as it relates to easements, and you can see that remains relatively unchanged in 2021 relative to 2020. Our seniors tax credit, so this is the program that the city offers as it relates to seniors who meet certain thresholds surrounding assessment value and income levels. And based on 2020 actuals, we are reducing the funding for the program by about $30,000. And again, that is simply tied to our experience in 2020. Supplementary taxes, these are changes in assessed value that occurs in year, either from growth or from reassessments. You'll note that we are not recommending changing this this particular revenue, and I'll just the rationale for not suggesting an amendment at this time is staff are challenged as to what to anticipate during the COVID recovery, and for that reason we're being cautious as it relates to supplementary taxes. You'll see in the historical information it was favorable. It was favorable by about $2 million in 2020 relative to budget. However, because we are not quite sure what to anticipate as it relates to growth or expansion in 2021, either expansion to existing facilities or changes in reassessment of those facilities in terms of expansions or change in use, is for that reason we're being conservative in suggesting that that continue to be budgeted just short of $10 million. Tax remissions and write-offs for members of Audit, Finance, and Admin. You'll know that there's a number of requirements under Municipal Act, Section 357, 358, whereby when there's a change, either a facility unfortunately might have burnt down, or there's a demolition during a redevelopment phase, there is a reduction in those taxes for that period of time until such time as that facility is reestablished. That forms part of the tax remissions and write-offs. As well, just to remind committee, this also includes the rebates for charities, compassionate appeals, as well as the veteran rebates, as well as transfer to taxes and a small amount of tax write-offs just for the benefit of the community. When looking at the historical information, our tax write-offs have only amounted to about $6,000 in 2020, $6,500 in 2018, and $2,000 in 2017. And why I highlight that is that the city, as other cities, are entitled to proceed to tax sales in the case where property owners are not able to meet their obligations. I just want to leave committee and the community with an appreciation of understanding that we try to work with taxpayers to minimize the tax sales. And just as a reminder to the committee, we actually paused on property tax sales in 2020 because of the pandemic, and we didn't want to create any further hardship for certain property owners in 2020. So again, that makes up our write-offs and our rebates. As well, committee members will know of a number of programs that are used to either incent brownfield redevelopment or RACE grant, and that represents about $600,000. We're suggesting that remain unchanged for 2021. Our enterprise grant, as it relates to residential and commercial development in certain parts of the city, based on some historical actuals, we're suggesting that increase by $200,000 to $900,000. And finally, based on historical actuals, our LEAD program, which is used to incent redevelopment to a LEED certificate or LEED level for facilities, that be reduced by $200,000, and that's again based on our historical actuals. You can see overall that revenues, non-program revenues, are increasing slightly by about 1.4%, or about $432,000. One of the other sources of revenue that the city benefits from is dividends tied to Electra Utilities and Hamilton Utilities Corporation. A portion of those dividends are applied to reduce the levy for taxpayers, and you can see that represents about $5.3 million, slightly less in 2021 relative to 2020. Again, this is only a portion of what we budget. We budget about $14 million in total annually. The balance of it is tied to the capital program, either towards funding of infrastructure as well as a funding stream to the poverty reduction social housing investment program. So overall, about $14 million, slightly lower. You may see in the actuals in 2020, we were lower by about $1 million. And so we will continue to engage Hamilton Utilities Corporation and Electra to get a better sense as to what they see moving forward as it relates to the city's dividends and their cash flow stream. And I know that the Electra board is looking at their 2021 strategy, corporate strategy, business strategy, and will be coming forward with some potential revisions to that strategy that will require some discussions with the shareholder. Investment income, I believe our investment income for 2020, we're tracking towards a performance of about $31 million in investment income. The majority of that goes back to reserves to improve the sustainability of reserves. A portion of that $31 million as it relates to our 2020 performance will be applied towards reducing the levy, and that represents about $4.1 million in investment income. Slot revenues, this is tied to the Flamborough facility. We budget about $5.2 million annually in slot revenues. We're suggesting to keep that at $5.2 million, even though we know that 2021 will be less than the 5.2 million as 2020 was because of the pandemic and because of the closure of that facility. I believe in 2020 our actuals were trending somewhere in that million to $1.1 million. What we will be doing is applying a portion of the provincial restart funding to offset the foregone slot revenues as the closure of that facility was tied to the pandemic and the restrictions and the response to the pandemic. Provincial Offences Act revenues, you may recall from a previous GIC that we identified an error in the budgeting where a portion of those POA revenues could be recovered from the restart funding, and committee has approved an amendment already to the figure that's referenced on the right there, the $1,098,000. So that was a administrative error that was caught, and council has already approved a amending motion to correct for that. And finally, there is a provincial funding, small provincial funding amendment of about $292,000 that we realized in 2020 that we are not budgeting for in 2021. So you can see that these other revenues represent a subtotal of about $1.4 million in reduced revenues and principally tied to the error in the POA revenues, as well as the provincial funding, or a reduction of about 8.1%. So the balance of the slides in the slide deck are for committee's reference. As in previous years, we're providing you a historical trend as it relates to actuals and our projected actuals for 2020. Again, they're there for your information. As well as just a reminder of the amendments that have been made to date. So again, some of the content in your slide deck today do not require any further actions, including the operating impacts of capital and the Provincial Offences Act budget adjustment. Committee is already approved amendments as it relates to these items. And finally, the council referred items again are just provided for your reference and will be brought back to committee on February 11th, as will the business cases. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, happy to answer any questions that committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zagaric. We have one member up, Councillor Ferguson. If you, before
I can
doing
stop
that, if you
sharing.
yeah, thank
Yes,
you.
there we go. So just give me a second. There we are.
Of course.
Can I go now?
Please proceed, Councillor Ferguson.
Okay, thank you. So Mike, thanks for the information. You know, I've been questioning throughout the budget presentations why staff cost, employee-related cost, I think you call it, has been up over 3% in most departments. Well, the collective agreements are sitting back at 2%. I'm not aware of any big jump in numbers this year.
Councillor Ferguson, may I interrupt you?
Can you hear me okay? I'm sure.
No, your audio is
Yes?
very choppy audio. If you could take your video off, and that way we'll concentrate on your audio.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to give up on this new connection to the internet through the stick because I had the same problem last night. The Conservation Authority had the same problem yesterday at AF&A. But my question to you, Mike, is that during the budget.
Well. Sorry, I can hear you very well
once
now.
I turn the video off. Yeah, once I turn the video off. So, Mike, throughout the whole presentation of the budget this year, it's jumped out that the employee related costs are well over 3% in most departments. And, you know, I've been scratching my head because collective agreements are 2 or under for the 2021. And there's no big jump in OMERs or other things that tend to shock us from now to then. So first of all these adjustments you've been just reviewed with us, are they included in the budget that's been presented to us by various departments?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the items that are reported through the corporate financials are not represented in the departmental budgets. And for that reason, they're tracked as corporate financials. So as it relates to, I believe the councillor is referring to corporate pensions, benefits, and contingencies. So again, they're before you today as corporate financials as they're not represented in departmental budgets.
Okay, but the latest number you give me, and I'm going to try to remember it, was 2.4% is the impact of the levy increase to go up. Are they included in that number?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes. So corporate financial non-program revenues are reflected as part of the global budget. But what I interpreted the councillor's question is, are these figures also reported or captured in department budgets? No, they aren't. And for that reason, they're part of this presentation.
So what you presented to us today is not one of the main drivers for employee-related costs that we've seen through the last month and a half.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, that's correct. So the information that forms part of this presentation would not also be captured in the departmental presentations.
Interesting. Okay, I'll just think this through, Mike. Thanks for now.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Thanks, General Manager Zagaric, for the status update here of tax adjustments. Can I just ask for a couple of questions for clarity? On slide 4, the senior tax credit, Mike, you're showing, is that $30,000 less? And if it is that because you're anticipating for some reason a number of the close to 4,000 seniors that have been eligible for this program and have taken advantage of this program, a portion of them may not in 2021, or some difficulty in payments? Can you just elaborate on exactly what that line item means, please, General Manager Zagaric?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the councillor is correct. It's a reduction in the cost of the program that really reflects our 2020 experience. 2020, we're reporting approximately $537,000 in cost for the program. So again, we're basing 2021 on our 2020 experience, and committee will recall that it's principally driven by income thresholds, or income threshold for 2021 will not change. It'll remain the same as 2020 at $36,900. And the assessment cap will be based on a value of $493,000 in terms of the assessment cap, and the rebate amount is increasing. I don't have that figure yet, but in 2020 it was $198.
Okay, thanks, General Manager Zagarek. Boy, Mike, when we started this seniors tax rebate program, what, 15, almost 20 years ago, I think the market value assessment was around 225,000.
Yeah.
My goodness, it's up to close to 500 now. But anyways, okay. And on slide 5, Deputy Mayor Wilson, hydro dividend. Again, Mike, can you elaborate and explain to me? I remember with the merger of Electra a few years back, we went from getting about 7-8 million a year to hopefully getting about 13 million a year, if my memory serves me right. What are you telling us here on this slide? Is hydro not collecting as much revenue similar to other agencies because of the pandemic? Or were they collecting as much revenue, but we're not going to see as much? Through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, if the General Manager can elaborate on that line, please.
Yeah. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So slide 5 shows one part of the annual hydro dividend. We reflect about $5.3 million of the dividend to reduce the operating budget, the levy impact for taxpayers. The balance of the hydro dividend, about in excess of $8 million, is reflected in the tax-supported capital program. And it goes either to support our infrastructure renewal, as well as you'll recall that a portion of the poverty reduction housing strategy was funded from the dividend uplift tied to the Electra merger. So what we're noting is that while we budget approximately $14 million in hydro dividends, our 2020 actuals were about $1 million less than budget, so about $13 million. And we will be reaching out to our partners at Hamilton Utilities Corporation and Electra, as that dividend is comprised of both dividends from Hamilton Utilities Corporation and Electra, to get a better understanding if the reduction was tied to the pandemic, or whether or not there have been there could be regulatory legislative changes that could have impacted with in part because of the pandemic. So we want to work with our partners to have a better understanding what we should anticipate for 2021 and moving forward. Having said that, we continue to budget around that $13 to $14 million mark. And we're hoping to preserve that level of funding at a minimum for 2021.
Thanks, General Manager Zagarek. So my recollection was accurate in the 13, 14 million a year. Thanks for refreshing my memory, though, about the 8 million approximately that was used for capital. And lastly, Madam Deputy Mayor, I know we're not getting to council referred today or business case, but Mike, I think I stumbled on the fact a couple of years ago, and I think maybe for my for the newer members of council this term, just to clarify, I found it a little tricky distinction. Council referred and business case items before us are both categorized, if you will, as enhancements. Business case are, if you will, maybe more management recommended, and council referred are exactly from council on behalf of our community. But I remember I found it a little tricky distinction a couple of years ago until you clarified, and maybe if you could just clarify that once again, that really, regardless of the terminology, these are all still enhancements. Through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, please.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the councilor's correct. These would all represent enhancements. You'll see in the one case that while it represents a change, there's no net levy impact or FTE impact, and that's specific to a position in planning and economic development. And the councilor's correct, is it comes before committee through two processes. Business cases are proposed enhancements that senior leadership team are putting forward for committee's consideration I've stated, and the city managers made reference in previous committee meetings that we try to constrain the number of business cases we bring forward for 2021, given our circumstances and the circumstances of the community. So we've really focused on the number of business cases and limited the number of business cases that are being put forward. And in the cases of council referred, these are items that have come before the Budget General Issues Committee through standing committees. And just a little clarification on council referred, these could still be items that staff have brought forward to standing committee for standing committee's consideration, and standing committee has referred it to the budget process. So while it's referenced as council referred, sometimes these come about through reports from staff for standing committee's consideration, and for that reason it's captured and reported as council referred.
Thank you, General Manager. Madam Deputy Mayor, do I have a few seconds to close comment? Am I all right?
I'd love to hear your closed comments.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. So, General Manager Zagarek, if you want to make a closing comment to my closing comment, and I don't want to sound insensitive, but I just want to say how pleased and proud I am with taxpayers, residential taxpayers overall through the pandemic. I think, General Manager Zagarek, in the hour presentation you gave, that you said overall taxpayers were still forthcoming by a lion's share of fulfilling their obligation to our municipality. I think I noted you said the commercial side has taken a massive hit, but overall the residential side has hung in there with this municipality, and hopefully we've still delivered the services they've wanted. So without sounding insensitive or the wrong language, I just want to say how pleased and proud I am of at least the taxpayers from the East Mountain community. Thanks, Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you, and we know never to challenge you on your recollection, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Clark.
Can you hear me, Deputy Mayor?
Yes, I can.
I just have a quick question to Mr. Zagarek about the pills, which is the $75 per head and beds, I guess they call it. I was curious if university and college enrollment decreases, does it affect how much money that we get from the pill budget, or is the pill budget based on the number of heads and beds that could be in the universities and hospitals?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, great question, because of a bit of the turmoil that is occurring in the post-secondary school environment, as well as our healthcare sector, because the heads and beds captures not only our post-secondary partners, but our healthcare partners too. So the councillor, first off, is correct that the amount per head and bed is still $75, and that is disappointing. As I've mentioned previously, that hasn't changed since 1987. In fact, the only time that was first introduced in the 1950s, I believe at $25. A few years later, maybe in 55, it was $50. Then it changed to in 1987 to $75, and hasn't changed since 1987. And again, that has created challenges for municipalities as a whole, who have these partners in our communities, and that the services they demand, municipal services, continue to increase in the cost of delivering those services. But the direct revenue stream that we're realizing from these facilities haven't changed over that period. To the councillor's specific question, is frankly, I don't know. I don't know how the province will treat payment in lieu of taxes. My sense is they'll continue to pay payment in lieu of taxes based on the formula, which, to the councillor's question, is based on full-time enrollment. So the number of students who enroll full-time, irrespective of whether they are learning virtually or maybe living in the community that the facility is located in, that forms the methodology or input in terms of the calculation as it relates to post-secondary partners. As it relates to hospitals, it's tied to beds. And again, what we'll need to have a better appreciation for is the response during this pandemic and the beds, and how those beds are utilized So again, I would hope that there would be some stability and the province wouldn't adjust these calculations during a pandemic, but would revert back to some traditional basis or methodology, and that's what we would lobby for. But again, we will track this going forward. And again, my expectation is that the province will be reasonable and not reduce those amounts. The one change I just want to highlight, and maybe a little bit of inside baseball, there was a change in the provincial budget as it relates to some facilities, some payment in lieu of taxes facilities, whereby the municipalities benefit by capturing the education portion of those taxes. That's no longer going to be available to municipalities, and we're trying to still calculate what impact that will have for the city of Hamilton going forward. So it just happens to be one of those files that continues to create challenges for municipalities as a whole, in part because it is very outdated in terms of how it's determined and calculated, and as well as some recent legislative changes continues to add to those challenges.
I sense your frustration. I guess we can only hope that the province will be reasonable as they go forward this year. Thank you.
Thank you. And just FYI, I know McMaster University this year has its largest first-year class in the history of the organization. So it would be, if we're stuck with heads and beds, it would certainly be nice if they actually counted all of those heads. Thank you. I have no further speakers. I need a mover and a seconder. Oh, Councillor Ferguson, were you wishing to speak?
Yes, I just want a follow-up question based on the comments made by Councillor Jackson's question.
Councillor Ferguson, may I please ask you to take your video off so we can hear you? Thank you.
Just a follow-up question to the answer that Councillor Jackson got from Mike around the enhancements and particularly the business case. When the paramedic chief did his presentation, he had a 7% increase for the additional 10 paramedics for an additional ambulance. But you're showing that under enhancements. So does that mean it's not, that has not been included, that enhancement in the paramedic budget?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'd have to go back to confirm. I know when we show Paul's departmental presentation, I believe we had two subtotals. One was a subtotal exclusive of business cases, then a subtotal inclusive of business cases. But if the councillor is making reference to the paramedics line in the departmental budget, it would not include the business case. That's correct. So departmentally, we showed it two ways. Sorry.
So that $1 million still has to be added to the levy then, added to the 2.4%.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes. So in the case of the business cases, and Council referred, you'll see reference on those slides, slides 12 and 9. You'll see that there's a footnote in both of those slides that identify if all of the council referred and all of the business cases were to be approved, they would represent about a 0.2% tax impact.
Okay, because the chief was very defensive of that additional evidence that he needed it. And what I saw in the budget book was a 7% increase, but in fact that extra $1 million is not included so far in the levy forecast that we have in our budget of 2.4%. That's, wow, I didn't interpret it that way. Okay, that's all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, it's moved by Councillor Jackson and seconded by Councillor Pauls to receive Mr. Zagarik's presentation. The vote will be up momentarily. It is up now.
Madam Chairman, I can't, the vote's not coming up for me, so can I give you a thumbs up?
Certainly, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. T Councillor Clark, Councillor Marula, Councillor Collins. Mayor Fred Eisenberger has a thumb up.
Again, I'm not sure why, because I'm on eScribe and it indicated a previous vote, but the actual vote didn't pop up.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Deputy, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Mayor, that was my fault. I had you marked out. Thank you.
Elsie Paparella, do we have the votes in? Okay. Councillor Clark, I think we're having some difficulty receiving your vote. And if you're able to hear me, if you could mark in the eScribe or, okay, we're going to go with what we have. 11-0, that carries. Thank you. We're on to item number 8, motions. Oh, beg your pardon. Or page 4. Vote was carried. I don't, after discussion items of 7-1, I have motions, Madam Clerk. I'm getting older. 7.1. Okay. Impact of the 2021 fare increase, the 10-year local transit strategy. We have, who do we have here to assist us in introducing this report? Ms. Debbie Delvado. Mr. Zagaric will still be with us, I trust. Okay, thank you. Debbie, good morning. I'm not sure if you'd like to speak to the report before we entertain questions.
So good morning, Madam Chair, Debbie Delvado, Director of Transit. So what you have before you here is a report that details or outlines the impact of deferring the 5-cent fare increase that has been contemplated as part of year 5 of the 10-year transit strategy. So the assumptions in the report are that we would still implement year 5 in September, and if we were to freeze the fare increase that is contemplated, which as Council will recall as part of the 10-year transit strategy, inherent in every year of the strategy is a fare increase that was approved as part of the 10-year transit strategy. So if we were to freeze the fare increase in September, respecting the fact that it would now have a cumulative effect with the subsequent years in the 10-year strategy, in the report on Table 1 provides the total net levy pressure that would result as in regards to that fare increase, which is just a little bit more than $7 million.
Okay, thank you. So if there's no further comments to be made from staff with this report, I'm going to go to the floor and see if there are members of council who would like to ask some questions of it. Councillor Jackson, and then Councillor Collins. Councillor Jackson, please.
Yes, can you hear me, Deputy Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. I'm toggling a lot quicker these days, 10 months later. Thank you. Okay, so Director Delvadova, I'm looking at your Table 1. You quickly finished by saying $7 million impact, but that's 5 years down the road. So looking at just today and for 2021 year 5, if we freeze and do not implement the 5 cents, that's a $596,000 budget pressure through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson.
So through the Deputy Mayor to the Councillor, yes, that's correct, Councillor. Each year, so for year 5, which would be 2021, it would be an additional $596,000 pressure. And then the subsequent pressures for year 6 right through to year 10 to that $7 million number. So on my transit day, my drivers, as per the transit budget, were 3.4%.
Yes.
that additional deferral of that $596,000 would then turn that 3.4% to a 4.2% pressure for the transit budget for 2021 if we were to defer the 5-cent fare increase.
So, Director, thank you. So, but just to be clear for me, if hypothetically we deferred the 5 cents this year, that doesn't mean we wouldn't implement the corresponding nickel increase in years 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 separately, correct? Or are you assuming that's a freeze for the next 5 years, hence the $7 million budget pressure? Through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson?
So through the chair to the councillor, the chart represents just the 5-cent fare increase for 2021. It assumes the additional fare increases through the subsequent years of the 10-year strategy. So just deferring that 5 cents in 2021 as it's cumulative through the remainder of the 10-year strategy, the associated revenue loss would be the $7 million just for the deferral in 2021.
Holy smokes. For one deferral, Debbie, forgive me, Debbie, I'm sorry. I apologize for my shocked response, but for the 1-year deferral of the nickel, the accumulative compounding effect for 5 years further is 7 million total, correct?
So through the chair, that's correct. And that's based on the budgeted revenues and ridership that we have within the course of the 10-year transit strategy. So that one nickel deferral in 2021 cumulatively, because each year we would not still see that revenue from that 5 cents fare increase into the subsequent years. So it just accumulates until at the end of the 10-year transit strategy. So the worst case scenario would be the $7 million.
Wow. Okay, last question, Deputy Mayor Wilson, to the director. Some of my colleagues have talked about who I think are supportive of this, some kind of offsetting funding from senior levels of government that may or may not be available. Debbie, are you aware of that? And have you thought of that moving forward? And that's my last question, Deputy Mayor Wilson.
Thank you. So through the chair, we do have the Safe Restart Agreement, which is funding to support any revenue losses due to ridership. So, based on what is in the Safe Restart Agreement currently, it would be applicable to apply to any of that funding. But just reminding council, we only have approval of funds until March of 2021. And we are still awaiting announcements for any additional funding for the remainder of 2021 from senior levels of government.
So what do you have currently? Sorry, Madam Deputy Mayor, I just said to you that was my last, but in light of what the director just informed me about, which is important, what is left then in your reserve to March 2021? What's left in your bank account from that restart, Debbie? And that's my last question.
Through the chair, and I just give me a second, or maybe I might defer to Mike Zagaric. I did have it here in front of me. Just
or if you want to look it up and let the deputy mayor go to other speakers, as long as you could provide that through this discussion, I'm fine.
Thank you. Perhaps we can do that.
How's that, Deputy Mayor Wilson? Thank you, Director, and I'll wait to hear that answer later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Terrific, thank you. Through you to Debbie. Debbie, I recall that the transit fares, as part of the transit fare increases, as part of the 10-year strategy, the enhancements were hand in hand with the fare increases. Was that not the case as part of the original plan that was presented, understanding there have been some interruptions with funding delays from other levels of government?
So through the chair to the councillor, you were a little broken up, but I think what you're asking me is if the fares were hand in hand with the enhancements to fund those. So if that was your question, that's correct. The strategy included a means by which the fare increases would help fund the service improvements. Initially, in the first few years of the strategy, they were more significant to play catch up, and then there was a strategy moving forward through the subsequent years to have fare increases to support those service improvements hand in hand.
Thank you. And with the proposal that's in front of us today, I'm assuming with the $7 million less for the contributed to the plan, does that mean less enhancements somehow over the future, or how does that work itself out?
So through the chair to the councillor, it does not mean that we are considering less enhancements. So the remaining years of the 10-year strategy would be pending budget approvals in the years from council, that the remaining years in the 10-year transit strategy would be implemented service enhancements, fare increase that was approved happening in those subsequent years of the plan.
So it means more of a subsidy from the levy than an implication on service delivery.
Through the chair, yes.
Okay. And do you support the motion that's in front of us here today? I didn't see whether, unless I missed it there, does staff support the transit freeze in light of the financial implications?
Councillor Collins, you're breaking up, but what I think I heard you ask is staff in support of the proposed freeze? And if that's not correct.
Correct.
Thank you.
They support.
I'm sorry, your audio is quite broken up, so I'm going to ask.
I'm not sure whether they.
Councillor Collins, just if you can hear me, I need you to know that your audio is pretty much gone. So I'm going to ask.
Were they part of writing it?
I'm going to ask Ms. Valvado if she would like to take
Can you hear me?
question as we have heard it at the beginning. I can hear you now. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you okay.
I need you to know that for the last minute, your audio was very sporadic, and I'm going to pose your question on your behalf because we cannot hear you. And your question to Ms. Valvado was, is staff in support of the proposed freeze? Ms. Debbie
That's
Valvado?
correct.
So through the chair to the councillor, in regards to whether we're supportive of the fare freeze, we are still supportive of implementing year 5 in September as per the transit strategy, and we are in council's hands as to what direction or approvals that you have in regards to whether or not we freeze the fares in September.
No, I understand the political decision to be made, but from a transit perspective, does increasing the fares negatively impact the plan or not?
So through the chair,
I'm assuming I assumed coming into the meeting today that the plan that was presented through your budget is the one that you're recommending.
So through the chair, so the plan that we're recommending through the budget, of course, was the implementation of year 5. Respecting the freezing of the fares, that will create a $600,000 additional pressure on the budget that we would have to identify an additional funding source in order to mitigate the levy pressure. From the perspective of the impacts of COVID and, respecting the fact that a lot of residents in the city and right across the world are, impacted financially because of COVID. If this speaks to the affordability of transit or the ability for people to be able to sustain or still pay the appropriate fares, then, we still want to make sure that transit is affordable given the impacts of COVID.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have Councillor Danko, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess wait, where's my video? Here we go. There we go. Sorry about that. I guess I'm a little confused about this report because the motion is to freeze the current fare for the duration of COVID, and there's nothing in the actual motion in what I was expecting to be reported back about freezing that fare for consecutive years throughout the entire 10-year transit strategy. So just so I'm clear, if the fare was to be frozen for the duration of COVID, say that's to the end of 2021, the current cost of that is around $600,000. And then at that point, when COVID is over and we're back to our normal measures, we could bring that fare back up to where it was going to be in year 6, correct?
Ms. Valvado?
So through the chair, in response to the motion and the request about the impact that a fare freeze in 2021 would have on the 10-year transit strategy, the fare freeze for year 5 in 2021 would be that $600,000. And what the table is showing you is the cumulative impact of the fare increase in 2021. So we did not contemplate a fare freeze for every subsequent year within the 10-year transit strategy. We developed the table based on the assumptions of the revenue and ridership as laid out in the 10-year transit strategy and what the one fare freeze in September of 2021 would have as an impact for the subsequent years in the strategy.
I understand that, but my understanding is you're carrying that 5-cent fare loss of fares through the entire 10 years, whereas maybe I can just ask, what is the projected fare increase for year 6?
So through the chair to the councillor, as part of the 10-year transit strategy, each subsequent year of the strategy is contemplating a 5-cent fare increase for the remaining years of the 10-year transit strategy.
So if this council decided that we are interested in helping out our residents and subsidizing that extra $600,000 for 2021, then come 2022, to instead of a 5-cent increase, make it a 10-cent increase, we'd be back on track with the rest of the strategy and not incur that additional $6.5 million.
So, excuse me, so through the chair, that would be a different analysis from the perspective that any additional or subsequent increase in a fare, we would have to do the analysis based on elasticity. So as you increase fares, there is a certain elasticity that we experience from a ridership perspective that people, depending on the cost of your services, may or may not continue to use your services. So it's not as simple as just putting on an additional 5 cents in the subsequent year. This chart is representing the levy impact or the levy pressure just from suspending the 5 cents in 2021 and what that means in every subsequent year. It contemplates still putting in all the services for the remainder of the 10-year transit strategy, as well as the associated fare increases that were originally in the 10-year transit strategy plan.
Okay. Can I ask for 2021 what the ridership assumptions are for that loss of, for the levy impact? Was that based on COVID level ridership, or was that based on a return to, or what was in the 10-year transit strategy ridership levels?
So through the chair to the councillor, all the assumptions in this table are based on budgeted numbers. So the budgeted ridership number for 2021 remains the same as it was for 2020. And that number is 22,110,034 rides is what we had budgeted for ridership for 2021.
And is that different than what our actual ridership is going to be? I guess it's a difficult question to answer, but we're still at, I think it was 40% ridership. So if our actual ridership is going to be significantly different than our budgeted ridership, is that going to impact the net levy pressure?
So through the chair, because we are talking about budgeted numbers, you're seeing before you the budgeted impact on the levy. Respecting actuals, we did provide a report on the financial implications of COVID on revenue and ridership. And we are currently, or at least at the time of the writing of the report back at Transit Day, we're projecting a ridership variance of less than, a loss of 10 million rides specific to the impact of COVID, and then a loss of revenue of approximately 20 million. But those are actuals. What we're talking about here is what is in the budget. So you can't mix up the actuals with the budget because we are maintaining our budget levels. We have not reduced the budget for transit at this point in time.
But just perhaps I'm still not understanding it, but if we're at significantly reduced ridership for the remainder of COVID, regardless of what's budgeted, wouldn't that make the impact of a transit fare increase reduced by that reduced ridership, because it's dependent on ridership, the actual ridership through COVID? So if we have significantly less ridership, the impact of freezing the fare would be proportionally substantially reduced, would it not?
Debbie?
So through the chair, so to be able to make a determination in regards to the impacts of COVID on revenue and riderships to actuals, would it involve a whole range of assumptions to be built into a calculation to determine exactly what that is. So, for the purposes of trying to determine from a budget perspective, the budget has not been reduced. We're currently at a maintenance budget, and based on those budgeted numbers, this is what the impact to the budget would be. I'm not sure if Mike Zagaric is still on the call. He might be able to explain it a little bit more succinctly than I am doing at this particular time.
I can call on Mr. Zagaric if you would like.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure I'll speak to it more succinctly, but maybe I'll highlight the importance of continuing to budget for a normal year is just reminding councillors that the federal and provincial restart funding is in place to help municipalities as it relates to specifically the transit stream, is in place to offset the impact that COVID is having on the operations or transit operations for those municipalities that have responsibility for delivery of transit. So the strategy that we are employing is to budget for a normal year such that we can report to the federal and provincial government the difference between what our actual experience will be in 2020 and in 2021 relative to what we would have experienced had it been a normal year. So it allows us to clearly demonstrate to senior levels of government what the COVID impact has been by reflecting the difference between budget and actuals. Not sure if that helped or complicated.
It does help. So what I'm hearing is that this 2021 budget is for a normal year. So that revenue budget of $47.176 million is a budget for a normal year. But we are not in a normal year. We're in COVID with COVID ridership, which is, I believe, around 40% of what our normal ridership would be. So if the levy impact for a normal year is $596,000, if we're only at 40% ridership, then the budget impact for the COVID year would be 40% of that, which is $240,000. Would that logic not follow through?
Mr. Zagaric?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I think what the councillor and committee needs to consider is we are budgeting again based on a normal year. So as Debbie and I think what I heard Debbie identify is transit is budgeting according to their 2020 ridership figures. And what I'll assume then is what they've captured is the benefit of the additional 5 cents for the last 4 months of 2021. And the importance of continuing to budget in that manner is such that at year end of 2021, we can demonstrate to the province and federal government what our foregone revenue was because of COVID. So again, if our actual experience is 60% less than budgeted, we would look to offset that foregone revenue from the restart funding. So again, I think it's critical that we continue to budget for a normal year. If committee and council wanted to defer the increase for 1 year, I would recommend to committee that we need to offset that in some manner, either a transfer from reserve or some other revenue, so that we are budgeting for what we would normally expect. And if these are eligible costs in 21 to be offset through restart funding, we would try to exhaust that revenue stream to try to position ourselves in a more favorable way when we do our 2021 year end. So apologize for the length of that answer, but I think the short answer is I think it's critical that we continue to budget for a normal year.
Thank you. And just finally for me, Madam Chair, no argument about budgeting and using the normal year ridership for our budgeting. I don't think that's in question, but the question is, what is the cost to the taxpayer for foregoing that 5% or sorry 5-cent transit increase for what is not a normal year? And I don't think I have that answer in this report, because I believe that would be substantially less than what's being projected here. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to let members of council know, I'm only timing you when you speak, continuing that tradition. Councillor Nan.
Thank you. Thank you to the director and to General Manager Zigaric for answering the questions, and to my colleagues for your line of questioning, because I think the challenge for us as a council is to get clear about our ongoing commitment to the 10-year transit strategy, while also integrating an understanding of the lived experiences of Hamiltonians who have to rely on transit at this time. So we're balancing the needs of an unnormal year, a very unnormal year, against a budgeting process that this council supports wholeheartedly. So I guess the only question I'd have is whether or not there's currently been any indication from the province about their approach to ongoing revenue shortfalls resulting in this pandemic that stretched beyond March. I know that, Director, you mentioned that the current funding only goes to cover offset of lost revenue that we experience on the books as of March 31st, 2021. But there is no indication at this point that the province is going to be looking at what happens between March and December.
Ms. Delvado.
So through the chair to the councillor, and I see Mike has turned on his video, so I can start off and then turn over to Mike. So as of today, we have the funding until the end of March, and we are anticipating additional funding beyond March, but I'll turn it over to Mike.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the positive update we have is there was a correspondence sent by Minister Mulroney to, I believe, to the mayor back on December 15th, and that correspondence makes reference not only to, I believe, the 17 million that we were assuming through to March 31st of 2021, but it makes reference that for budgeting purposes, the total available allocation for the city of Hamilton is up to $34,475,134. So very, very exact. So that is positive. What the unknown is how those funds ultimately can be leveraged in 2021. So we don't have the details as to, and the time period, because it does make reference to those costs incurred from January 1st, 2021. So there's no end date. I'm not sure what the intent is with respect to the allocation. Is it available to municipalities until such time as they exhaust the allocation? Is January 1st 2021 a significant date, so we have questions remaining as it relates to this December 15th correspondence. But again, the positive update would be is that this correspondence does make reference to funding over and above what has been firmly committed to date.
Thank you for that clarity. So more details to come, and perhaps why it's beneficial to consider this at a later date once we have some more clarity from other levels of government. I do have one more question related to the report through you, Chair. What happens if if the anticipated return in ridership is less than the forecasted 65%? So just in terms of the state of being, where we're at right now, our projected budgeted numbers versus the actuals. So scenario, what if we don't go anywhere near this as we're seeing currently in the pandemic impact to ridership? What then?
Debbie Delvedove or Mr. Zagaric?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to start, and if Debbie wants to add to it. If I understand, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, if I understand Councillor Nan's question, and Councillor, please correct me if I've misinterpreted it. If our actuals in 2021 are different than budgeted, how will we deal with that in 2021? So it's still a few unknowns. The restart program has not been tested. We've never gone through a restart program, and it isn't quite clear as it relates to eligible costs. So I'll share my interpretation as to what we might expect. Similar in 2021 versus 2020. At year end, what I would expect is that if the municipality has some avoided costs or savings, and I'll use transit as an example, if we had some favorable fuel costs that represented savings, if because of the decline in ridership in our accessible transit system, DARTS, if there are savings associated with that service, I would expect that the federal and provincial governments would expect us first to net those savings off of our year-end position. If we continue to have a deficit, and we are currently forecasting to continue to have a deficit for transit beyond those avoided costs or savings, then we would leverage the transit restart funding to mitigate those additional pressures beyond city savings and avoided costs. Again, what we don't know beyond the time period, I believe that there's been a firm commitment, which is March 31st of 2021, and Debbie will correct me if I'm wrong, is what the rules will be beyond this second phase. I think Jason corrected me previously. I made reference to two phases. In effect, there are two phases that bring us to March 31st of 2021, and then we have our third phase that we will need to seek some clarification for. So, short answer to the councillor's question: first, we'll apply any savings to offset any decreased revenues tied to ridership or other COVID-related costs, and then we'll try to exhaust our restart funding.
Debbie, I don't know if you'd like to add to that.
So through the chair to the councillor, no, I have nothing more to add.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to give you the opportunity. Councillor Nan?
Fair enough. I appreciate it. I guess the challenge that we have as a council is that we're looking to increase fares in a year when many of our residents are expressing economic hardship. And I know there's compassion around this table, and we're trying to figure out the right solution moving forward. But the reality at the end of the day is that HSR riders are looking at a fare increase as it currently stands to be in effect in September, while also having to see their property taxes increase. So I guess the challenge for me is in this report versus I guess, a policy decision and a reality that fare boxes have never been sufficient in funding an essential service like transit, and that there's a deeper conversation that needs to happen here in terms of adequate funding for essential services that we need to continue having with the provincial government and federal government. So no more questions to the report. I do have an update on the motion when we get there through clerks, if I could, please. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you. On our speakers list, we have Councillor Pearson, followed by Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and certainly listening to all the comments around the table this morning. So I may have missed it, or it may have been said in a different way through you to either Debbie or to Mike, because this, and going back historically, being involved in the initial process of coming up with this 10-year transit strategy, it was not easy. There has been, and it came about, the culmination, just for history, for the councillors who were not around the table today, it came about through the culmination of pretty well spending, I mean, I'm not going to exaggerate, but days on what the transit fare should increase to every year. And it was a very frustrating process. So getting the 10-year strategy in place was monumental for the city of Hamilton. So my question, because we tried to balance it off, that 50% of the fare box and 50% on the residual tax levy. So just please enlighten me again, either you or Mike, Debbie or Mike, how will this affect the increase potential that will go on the taxpayers? So one way or another, somebody's paying. Please and thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Ms. Delvedove if she would like to comment on that.
So through the chair to the councillor, and you're correct, the basis of the strategy and the 10-year transit strategy is 50% from the tax base and 50% from the fare box. So specifically on what the impact would be to the taxes, I'm going to defer to Mike because he probably can give you a better and more succinct answer as that impact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Through
Mr.
you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Debbie really has high expectations in my answers. But,
oh, it's just born from your past performance, Mike Jackson.
I'll try to answer in two scenarios. In a normal year, and recognizing this isn't in a normal year, if council if committee and council chose to pause on this year's fare increase, as I mentioned previously, we need to fully fund the program, and so I'll make an assumption that committee wouldn't be looking for a offsetting reduction in service to mitigate the foregone revenue. So it would require some form of revenue, and that revenue could be in the form of levy, so a additional levy increase, or if this was time limited, it could be in the form of a reserve contribution. That's in today's circumstances. In a normal year, I'll just add this in, but it will not affect us in 2021. But in a normal year, the other factor that committee would have to consider is the fact that transit is area rated, and if it was levy funded, that would be distributed according to the area rating. But you may recall me making reference in previous presentations, we're not looking at amending the area rating allocations for 2021 because of the pandemic. We're going to rely on 2019 kilometers and to the allocation numbers because of the chaos that this pandemic has created as it relates to transit delivery. So the short answer, Councillor, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, is the assuming that that committee would not be looking for a corresponding reduction in investment, it would have to be offset by revenues, and the revenues would have to represent either levy funded or a reserve contribution. Reserve, I would caveat the reserve as an appropriate funding source only if this were to be time limited. So to the much earlier discussion, if the intent is to pause on the 5 cents for 2021, and to piggyback off the currently budgeted 5 cents for year 6 and to introduce a 10-cent fare increase in 2022, then reserve may be an appropriate funding source for 2020.
And that's why we depend on Mike to give us succinct answers. Thank you, Mike, for that. Muchly appreciated. I'm going to put my two bits in, not 5 cents, but my 2 bits in. That if we think that freezing the fare increase of 5 cents this year and then increasing it 10 cents next year won't cause an outcry, believe me, it will. And I'll continue to listen to the debate around the table. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Ferguson next, please. And Councillor Ferguson, if just a reminder to keep your video off, please. Is Councillor Ferguson with us? If not, I will.
Yeah, my video is off, is it not, Madam Chairman?
It is off, and we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to go back to what Councillor Danko said. Is that all this discussion is taking a lot of time, centers around the motion that's coming up next, that the transit fare be frozen for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. This may all be moot if it's over in September because the increase doesn't come in until September. And I think this motion is being placed way too early. I think Councillor Nan sort of hinted she's going to do something about that, but it'd make much more sense if this was deferred until August, because we'll know by August whether it will in fact be over in September. The Prime Minister, the Premier, and the people we depend on heavily, our medical officers of health, seem to agree that anybody who wants a vaccine will have it by September, which makes this whole motion mute because the pandemic should be over. So I would strongly encourage Councillor Nan, just defer this until August and when we have more information, because if it gets defeated today, you can't bring it back without a 2/3 majority in August when we in fact have that information. So that's my comments, Madam Chair. I just hope Councillor Nan would give that some consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Mayor Eisenberger next.
Thank you. That's probably good advice, notwithstanding the challenges that it still proposes. And I just want to kind of cover up one area that I think is quickly being forgotten, which is both the federal and provincial government have put an enormous amount of resources to keep us whole. And the reality is that's going to be paid by the taxpayers. If you're a transit user or a residential homeowner taxpayer, at some point that is a bill that is going to be paid by the taxpayers of this community. So their attempt to try and keep us invested, to try and keep us investing in our transit system, to try and keep us, building a transit system that is going to continue to serve the community under the assumption that this pandemic will end and we will need to continue to put the investments in that we've already agreed. And I'm thankful for this because, I'm lamenting the annual debate around fare increases that we thought we had put to bed by saying, look, 50% taxpayers, 50% fare box was, I think, a positive step to get us away from the annual discussion around whether or not there should be a fare increase. I understand that there's challenges out there, but there are challenges in many, many other areas that we also have to consider. And we have to be mindful of the fact that we are applying for additional offsetting funds federally and provincially for all of the losses that we are going to experience in 2021 on an application basis. And I certainly would think that if I were a federal provincial government and we were using those resources to reduce costs for our taxpayers, provide a tax decrease for our taxpayers, that they would have a very dim view of sharing their resources to have that happen. So I'm very, very leery of having these kind of short-term reactions when there are actually long-term impacts to this, both locally as well as federally, provincially, because this is not just a small trivial matter of a nickel. There's a compounding effect, and the reality is that those dollars are required for us to continue to expand a transit system that benefits all transit users in a much more significant way. And I think that is a benefit that we also cannot ignore. So I'll be intrigued to see how the motion comes forward, but in a general sense, I have to be honest, I'm not supportive. I think there is more harm to be had than good. And certainly deferring it for a year and then doubling up next year doesn't really help the cause at all. That's just a silly, I think, idea that is not going to create any benefit for our taxpayers, for our riders, for anyone, quite frankly. That's just deluding folks to believe that there's a short-term benefit here that they're going to get benefit from that isn't going to last. So I don't want to go down that path either. But I do understand the challenges and difficulties. But we need to continue to move forward as if this pandemic is going to end and our transit system is going to recover, and we want to continue to build and grow. And so I'm going to maintain that mindset. And I don't know how we budget differently, pandemic-wise, if we are going to be applying for offsetting resources to help keep us whole in every way possible, so that we don't have to pass on these huge added costs to the taxpayers. So, final question, Madam Chair, to Michael: if we did not get the offsetting revenues or offsetting funds to help us offset the costs for PPEs and all the things, including $17 million for transit, what kind of tax increases would we have to pass on to the taxpayers this year to help offset that?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, maybe I'll just use transit in 2020 to illustrate the benefit of the restart. So I believe we're going to leverage about $11 million net of the savings and avoided costs the city will realize. So $11 million just to help us to offset the transit impact, and $11 million would represent likely about 1.2%, equivalent to a 1.2% residential tax increase. So clearly material and significant, and for that reason, as I've mentioned in previous committee meetings, just recognizing senior levels of government for their financial support.
Agreed, and we're going to continue on that path for 2021, and we're getting, thankfully, positive signals. If we were to expand that, though, into the $45 million that we received to help offset costs, the numbers go up exponentially. So, is it $8 million now for every percentage point tax increase that we're having to bear at this point? So if we multiply that, that's $45 million kind of runs into the 6 and 7% range.
Yeah, so through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, 1% is about $9 million. You may recall in a earlier report when we just, and recognizing no one has a perfect crystal ball, but when we were forecasting out to 2021, we identified some COVID-related exposures or financial risks of that 35 to I believe 56 million, in that range. And so just we'll use that $35 million range. That'd be equivalent to a 4% residential tax increase.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you're in your last 30 seconds.
Just a reminder that taxpayers as a whole are going to be paying this bill, one way or the other. And so to suggest that taxpayers aren't being supportive of our transit system and supportive of municipalities going forward, I think is something that we ought not forget about, as it is significant investments that are keeping us whole that otherwise we would have to pass on to the taxpayers in Hamilton alone, which is not a pleasant scenario and something we've done everything possible to avoid. And thankfully, the federal and provincial governments have stepped up in a significant way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Pauls next, but before I do so, if I could just request members, when we are categorizing other people's positions, maybe we could avoid words like calling them silly. You can refer to them as short-sighted. You don't support them. They're not prudent. But when we use terms like silly, it's really undermining it's hinting to a lack of intellect. Okay? Councillor Pauls.
Excuse me. So you're now suggesting that I have a lack of intellect?
No, I'm not suggesting
that. I used the word silly, so I apparently, yes, by your words, I have a lack of intellect because I used that word.
No.
So thank you. I don't appreciate your commentary, but I understand your direction on this thing. I wasn't saying that the councillor was silly. I thought the notion was silly. So I wasn't castigating any councillor or making any aspersions on anyone. I just don't think it's a good idea, and that was the intent of my comment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councillor Pauls.
Thank you. And I've been listening to all the conversation we're having, but we need to have HSR survive. And sometimes reducing the fare, they might not survive next year because we all know that COVID might be, if we do it this year, what about 2022? And my question is to Mike Z, if the compound, if we defer the 5 cents, is $7 million. If we have to do it for 2 years, would it be $14 million?
Question is to Mr. Zagarek. Mr. Zagarek, are you still here?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I am.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll refer to the table that Debbie presented through the staff report. If, and Debbie will correct me if I'm interpreting the table incorrectly. If the decision was to pause on the 5 cents for 2021 and introduce a 10-cent fare increase in 2022, that would be a $600,000 impact to 2021. If the decision was to pause on the 5 cent increase 2021 and introduce a 5 cent increase for 2022, which would be tied to year 6 of the transit strategy, but continue to pause on the 2021 increase, that would represent a additional impact in 2022 of about $1 million. And then the assumption would be that the city would go back to the original increase, 2021 increase, and you would introduce a 10-cent increase in 2023. So again, if it was a 2-year pause, it would have a $600,000 impact in 2021 and an additional $1 million impact in 2022.
So I think we need HSR to survive. We want HSR. We want everybody to take HSR. So in my opinion, we know COVID is around even this year and maybe next year. So my feeling is, like everybody said, we'll pay it either this way or through our taxes, and the mayor was right. So I think we should wait and find out a little bit more, and I appreciate everybody's comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I guess my question is to Debbie. Early in 2020, we provided free transit for a period of time. And there was a grant process from the provincial government, which really was offsetting lost revenue, and it wasn't an application-based process. You didn't have to apply for special dispensation, if you will. So we're reimbursed for that lost revenue when we offered a 0%, but basically no fares.
Ms. Delvedove.
So through the chair to the councillor, yes, back in March when we paused loading customers from the front door as a result of COVID, it caused us to pause fare increases. The lost revenue as a result of that was captured as part of the Safe Restart agreement, and the application for those funds were captured through that program.
And to be clear, we were reimbursed for that loss of fare revenue when we did that in the first Safe Restart program.
So through the chair, I'll start off and then I'll defer to Mike as far as whether we've actually received the funds back. But I do know that we, as part of our application for the Safe Restart program, that was identified and submitted to the province. And I'll defer to Mike as to whether or not those funds have flowed back to the city.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, actually our reporting deadline is March 31st of 2021. So we'll be submitting our claims in and looking to leverage the previous commitments in the coming weeks. Again, our reporting deadline is 2021. And as I mentioned previously, this really is an untested process. So we'll have a better sense as to our interpretation and whether or not our interpretation is accurate relative to what the seniors of government are expecting.
So, Deputy Mayor, to be clear, we really do not know if they will agree with everything that is listed in our lost revenue categories and the allocations according at the present time. Is that an accurate statement?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, it is. The short answer is we did ask for clarity by having categories of eligible costs and defining it, recognizing and to the credit of senior levels of government, they really wanted to get funding commitments into the municipalities as quickly as possible, so they didn't spend as much time as they might normally have done to define the program. So again, it leaves some interpretation, some risk as it relates to interpretation, and we'll have a better sense after we've submitted our reports to them at the end of March.
And not to belabor it, I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Mayor, but I'm truly just trying to understand this.
Oh, it's good.
So lost revenue, lost ridership, for example, my expectation would be that the province would fund any lost revenue because of lost ridership. Can I ask the question, is there any indication from the province to any of the municipalities that they are willing to reimburse a municipality who unilaterally cuts their fare, or in this case offered free fare, and offered that up as a case of lost revenue? So we made the political decision to cut the fare to zero for a period of time. So it's not just lost revenue from lost ridership, it's we made a political decision. Have they indicated that they're willing to reimburse that type of decision?
If Ms. Dalvido or Mr. Zagaric can comment on that in terms of the receipt of the information from the province. That's
so through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'll start, and if Debbie has any information through her channels, through transit operators, again, happy to, or encourage Debbie to jump into the conversation. It's a great question, Councillor. Something that we don't know whether or not. So, for instance, if the scenario the councillor is inquiring about, if the City of Hamilton were to establish a COVID-19 transit relief program one time, equivalent to foregoing the fares, would the federal and provincial governments agree that that is COVID related, or if that was a discretionary decision of council? And
Yes.
so short answer is I don't have an answer to that. And I frankly, it would be a guess. I don't know how to guide council as it relates to that scenario. I tend to be cautious and would suggest if it's discretionary, senior levels of government would lean towards interpretation that council had control over that. It wasn't necessarily tied to COVID. But again, this process hasn't been tested, and I can't rely on previous decisions or experiences in other municipalities. And I'm not sure if Debbie has any other information to add through her channels or through other transit operators.
So through the chair to the councillor, so my understanding, and I will triple confirm, but my understanding is that we did receive the funding for April through September, which would include that time where we paused fares. But I will triple confirm that and get that information to council, but we did receive that funding.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess my concern is that until we get a real policy decision out of them, the minister could claw back any money that we had discretion over. And I've seen them do that in the past too. Can I ask, has the Safe Start program changed from the one that was introduced in 2020 to the one that they're proposing now?
If I may, Mr. McKinnon, did you wish to add something?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Dan McKinnon, General Manager of Public Works, and I'll ask Debbie to confirm this, and it may be nuanced, but I just feel it might be an important point to make that I think the fact that we stopped collecting fares was more an outcome as opposed to a decision. And what I mean by that was the decision was made to go to rear door loading in order to keep the passengers, some distance between the passengers and the operators. By virtue of that, we could no longer collect fares. And so maybe Debbie could just confirm that, but I think that's an important nuance to just mention.
Debbie, would you like to confirm?
So through the chair, and that's absolutely correct. It wasn't a decision to stop collecting fares. It was an outcome as from the perspective that we needed to keep the operators safe. And in order to facilitate that, we had no means by which to collect the fares from the rear doors, which then caused us to pause fare collection at the front doors. And it was not just in the city of Hamilton, but that happened right across the GTHA. At other transit agencies as well, because we physically could not collect a fare at the rear doors.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon, because that would mean that the decision was based on occupational health and safety concerns as opposed to just trying to assist riders. So the last question I don't think was answered, Madam Deputy Mayor, has the program changed? I know other programs that they've introduced, it's now an application-based process. So they're not just blanketly paying for everything that you claim was a loss. Now they're saying you have to demonstrate to me what you did and why we should be paying for that. Did they do that in the Safe Start program too?
Ms. Delvedove, can you take that or?
So through the chair, I will defer to Mike in response to that question.
So through
Thank you,
Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to try to answer. And I'm going to rely on, I appreciate that committee members haven't this document to reference, but I'll rely on that December 15th correspondence to the mayor from Minister Mulroney. In the correspondence, it makes reference to some eligible costs, eligible expenditures, operating costs, capital costs to help guide our submission. But the one piece of reference in that communication, I'll read off because I think it's pertinent to the councillor's question, states that the SRA funding, Safe Restart funding, is not to replace the budgeted subsidy that the municipality provides to transit operations. And so I interpret that to mean that if the city budgets a contribution to reserve to reduce the fare increase, you can't swap out Safe Restart funding against that reserve contribution. So again, I'm simply relying on correspondences that we've been receiving as it relates to all the funding announcements, not just transit. Again, the correspondence from Minister Mulroney on December 15th does specifically state that the SRA funding is not to replace the budgeted subsidy the municipality provides to transit operations.
That seems pretty clear to me, which puts an entire different onus on what we're talking about. So if we were to support a fare decrease, then it's on our dime and likely will not be reimbursed by the province. I appreciate that clarification, Mr. Zagaric. I was unaware. No letters are shared, but sometimes I don't get to read the whole thing. I was unaware of that line. Thank you very much.
thank you. Seeing no other first-time speakers, I have Councillor Danko as a second-time speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just a fairly straightforward question to Director Delvedo, and if she doesn't have the answer at hand, I can take this offline. But what is our average monthly ridership right now? Do you have that number available?
So through the chair to the councillor, we do not track ridership. We don't have the ability as yet to track ridership. We do boardings, so that's through our automated passenger counters, and I believe The last numbers, the daily averages are around 21,000, but I'm happy to confirm that. I don't have that right in front of me.
So if it's 21,000 boardings, that would also per day, that would also include people that are transferring. It's some percentage in there, but let's just forget about that for a moment. So if I multiply that out by 30 days times 5 cents, that's $31,500 per month in lost revenue. And if I multiply that out by the 4 months remaining in 2021, it's about $126,000 would be the cost of extending this fare freeze through 2021.
So through the chair to the councillor, there is a transfer rate with those boarding numbers, so it is not a straight calculation as you're doing, and I'm happy to, you know, work with you offline to understand that, but it is not a simple calculation based on the boardings and the fare increase as the calculation that you've done, because not everybody who boards the vehicle is paying a fare. There is a transfer rate in that number.
Right, so it would be even less than $126,000. Say if it's 25% transfers, that brings it under $100,000. But we can take that offline and discuss further because I think what's the real question is, what is the cost of a 5% or 5 cent fare freeze for the remainder of the COVID? That's the question at hand, and it's just being over convoluted with discussions of how we're going to get that back from different levels of government and all that. The real question is, what would we have to fund in order to support that? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any other speakers. I need a mover and a seconder to receive this information report. It's moved by Councillor Farr and seconded by Councillor Pearson. The vote is up. Mayor Eisenberger. Councillor Marula. Councillor Collins. Councillor Jackson. And I believe Councillor Pauls had to leave. Thumbs up from Councillor Marula. Thumbs up from Mayor Eisenberger.
Mine's in the chat, Madam Chair.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Thumbs up written from Councillor Collins. Okay, good. Vote's closed. Carries 13-0. Thank you. We'll go on to motions now, members. 8.1, transit rate freeze. Councillor Nan, would you please introduce your motion?
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor, it's been brought to my attention through clerks that in order to put forward a motion that is related to our fare policy, it's not in the purview of the GIC budget meetings because it is already in the hands of council. It's an approved council policy. So any consideration of fare changes would have to be an amending motion to the corresponding reports that council has already approved and therefore would require a council vote. And also hearing from my colleagues around the table that rightfully we don't want to make any hasty decisions given that we have some time here looking at September being the implementation of our fare rate and also getting more clarity from higher levels of government what essential service investment for transit is going to look like and what is going to be eligible. So we'll be withdrawing this motion and it will come forward in a different form to a council meeting later in 2021. Thank you.
Councillor, thank you. I'm being summoned by Elsie Paparella, and I'd like to go to her now.
Sorry, I was waving. Just through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, just a point of clarification. Even though this would not happen until the end of September, if there was to be a fare increase, or staff would need to know a minimum of 2 months in advance. So the motion should come forward either to the June 9th or June 23rd council in order for staff to prepare for any fare increase should there be one.
So Councillor Nan can deliberate on that and advise us accordingly. a subsequent date? Okay, thank you. All right. Moving on to notices of motion then. Are there any today, members? I see a hand up, Councillor Nan. I'll recognize you, please.
Thank you. I think my mic is still on. Yes.
It
Okay.
is. Yep.
Thank you. So it's been circulated through the clerks to my colleagues. Notice of motion is reallocating Hamilton Police Service surpluses and investing in community resilience. For the record, I'll read the notice of motion onto the public record for placing on the agenda at a later time. Whereas the Hamilton Police Services has stated a focus on providing excellence in core business of policing, defined as property crime, violent crime, illegal drug control and enforcement, guns and gangs, traffic safety and enforcement. And whereas it is well documented that many residents, including Indigenous, Black and racialized people, feel unsafe and undersupported in the presence of uniformed and armed officers attending a nonviolent crisis call. And whereas in 2015 report, the John Howard Society highlighted the alarming rates of people experiencing crisis, ending up being criminalized for treatable health needs, instead of receiving the care and treatment they deserve in order to participate in society. And whereas the city of Hamilton is home to the most people living with disabilities, including mental health challenges per capita, and whereas the city estimates over 150 residents have been living in tents or informal structures since April 2020, in recognizing there are compounding factors that lead to homelessness, and whereas the Women Housing Planning Collaborative has stated that in the past year, over 400 women have accessed emergency low barrier drop-in supports without permanent housing options available to them. And whereas in 2018, there were over 120 opioid deaths in Hamilton, one of the highest rates in Ontario, and this council has declared an opioid overdose emergency. And whereas it is imperative to provide services using a trauma-informed approach where an individual's safety, choice, and control are a priority, and whereas best practices in social services across Canada point to the importance of deprioritizing policing as the primary response to residents facing crises in mental health, homelessness, substance abuse, and sex work, and point to investing in community-led, trauma-informed harm reduction and safety supports and services in these areas. Whereas the Federation of Canadian Municipality notes that the unsustainable increases in policing costs to municipalities are crowding out investments in early intervention and prevention. And whereas the Hamilton Police Service's annual variance reports continue to show surpluses, and whereas the City of Hamilton has no governing policy on the reallocation of surpluses from the Hamilton Police Services, and whereas investing in community-led services and infrastructure supersedes policing and effectiveness of building a sense of safety and belonging among residents who face systemic barriers, therefore be it resolved that A, staff be directed to set out a policy to ensure an annual year-end surpluses for the Hamilton Police Services comes back to the General Issues Committee for disposition prior to the appropriation of the Hamilton Police Services Board. And B, that staff be directed to create a new City of Hamilton Community Resilience Reserve account expressly to invest in housing and community-led supports in services to address homelessness, mental health addictions, substance use that center prevention and intervention. And C, that subject to the city having a year-end surplus, the above referenced policy is set out that any Hamilton Police Service year-end surplus be transferred to the Community Resilience Reserve account. And that is a notice of motion to be placed on the agenda at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. Anyone wishing to speak to that notice? I have Councillor Collins.
Okay.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
We speak to notices of motion. Sorry, clarity, point of procedure.
I don't think we did. I'll look to the clerk for clarification again. I asked the question.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm not sure what the question is about. It's not on the floor for debate, but if Councillor wants to state his question, we can see what he's asking.
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Super.
It's been noted that we don't debate notices of motion, so we're seeking clarification from you on the nature of your question.
Terrific. I get the procedural aspect perfectly. I did bring forward a motion in 215, which was passed by council. And so I don't dispute what's being presented. but it is suggesting that we don't have a policy. So I just want to make sure that I was hoping that the policy that we currently have that was created in 215 could be attached for council's information when this notice is presented and debated.
Okay.
So there's an error throughout the motion that's been presented.
Thank you, Councillor.
Elsie Paparella, I'm going to look to you for some procedural guidance.
Yes, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, that is fine. Because it's only a notice, we can go back to I will go back and research the 2015 policy so that it is before everybody, and I will send it to Councillor Nan as well, and we'll see if there's any conflicts. We have time until the next week's meeting.
Thank you for your help.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no further indication of comments or questions. Okay, thank you. Oh, look at item number 12, adjournment. May I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Clark. If you could vote, please, before you vacate the. It's coming up. It's up now. Please issue your vote before you leave. The vote is closed. Thank you. It carries 13-0.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe.
Be safe, everyone. Thank
Madam Deputy Mayor, I live at 65 East 44th Street for a piece of cake. Thank you.
Oh.